So we that was a great experience with Larry. Larry also is one of the people who endorsed Bronner, A Journey to Understand, was one of the first ones to read this book, as we've been telling you that you can get that at rickandbubba.com now, but it'll come out in stores everywhere on the 19th. So he's one you can read his endorsement there for those of you that are getting copies of that ahead of time. So we have a great friendship and relationship with Larry Taunton. And I know, Larry, before we get to what happened to you 2 months ago, you first would like to weigh in on all things the fireplace issue before we go any further?
Yeah, I mean, this should have been.
I really set up a pretty serious conversation.
Right. Well, we've had an ongoing fireplace discussion here that's reached 2 or 3 days.
I'm actually appalled, Rick, that I thought you'd be old school on this, like a real fireplace,
not a gingerbread building house guy.
No. The gas logs, you can tell they're gas logs, and it's the aesthetic value, and of course the heat. Of a real fireplace. I have in my house here gas logs, and I almost never use them because I can't stand the way they look. Whereas in France, where you've been, at La Bastide, our retreat center there, the Fixed Point Foundation retreat center there, we have a giant fireplace, you may recall, that you could put a compact car in.
Yeah, it's very big.
When, in the
Say
winter
the name
time,
of it again, Larry. I like the name of it.
La Bastide.
Yes.
That just sounds
means
cool,
the fortress.
The fortress.
Means the fortress. And you could put a compact car in that thing. On a cold winter day, you get some big logs in that thing and get it roaring.
Oh. So your fireplace draws.
Yeah, right.
That's right.
Now, what about if you put those big?
How do you say draws in French?
Yeah. How do you say smoke? How do you say smoke filled La Bastide?
Yeah. Well, that happens too.
Yeah. But anyway, which by the way, that was also, and of course, I stand here now like my dad did when he said if this country embraced soccer, it would destroy it. And sometimes he just puts his arms out like, huh?
Yeah.
So
I'm with your dad on that one.
Yeah, remember when I came back from La Bastide in France and I said, I have seen the future?
Well, there we go.
Yeah, I told you and so many people have referenced that conversation when I came back from going there and trying to let them know about what we've had our first successful run with the Fixed Point Foundation Institute there, which is teaching young people to be apologetics and be able to defend the faith. And when you take them to the place where the faith is gone, and for them to learn how to. So that's another conversation. But
the last conversation I remember having with Rick in La Bastide was where I said to him, and he seemed rather frightened. But we were climbing up a hill in a Land Rover, and I said, "Now, Rick, it's going to feel like we're going to tip over here, but trust me on this one." And Rick said, "What? What? Did you just say it's going to feel like we're going to tip over?"
I don't want to feel like it's about to tip over.
Not a good feeling.
And also, but anyway, and I know that we'll just kind of set this up and come back and talk about it. But we go back to, of course, you're not going to forget the date. I was actually, interesting, we were talking about deer hunting today on the program, which we do quite often this time of year. I was literally preparing for deer hunting when our pastor, Danny Wood, who's here showing support today, your pastor as well, in the studio, called me. And I picked up the phone. I was literally standing in the middle of a food plot, and I knew that Danny was out of town. And he said, "I want to let you know something about Larry," and I could tell immediately in the tone of his voice that it wasn't good. And and he said he's been in an accident involving the bicycle, which that's also not what you want to hear, and a vehicle. And at the time when we talked, literally, we both were not saying what we were obviously discussing, that you were clinging to life. And I remember, when things like that happen that are traumatic, and and especially if you're in a weird place like we both were. He was out of town, and I was standing in the middle of the wilderness. It's like, okay, what's my next move? And obviously, you, as we now know, were hit by a vehicle on a bicycle as you were coming down a hill. Now, the thing about today we want to talk about, you're learning more and more about it now, because obviously you didn't know what happened until you came either back alive or conscious, whatever that. And I know that's kind of up for debate, and that's part of what we want to talk about today. And you were in an ambulance, and this was not a mild accident. This was really, when we come back, if you just want to tell us about this new eyewitness that says, well, I can tell you exactly what happened. I saw the whole thing. I mean, you just recently got that information.
That's right.
Yeah, that'll kind of tell everybody how severe it was, and then we'll kind of unpack where you've been, and then we can talk about where we're going. But you sitting here right now, and I'm not. This is not hyperbole. This is no exaggeration. You're a miracle. I mean, you sit here right now as a miracle, and in the first, and I think we all knew that pretty much instantly when Danny laid out, here's what happened, and then Eddie Van Adler, Chris Adler's dad, Michael, then came to the hospital first for all of us, got there before any of us, and began to tell me all the things that were going on. We all knew it was going to take a miracle if we were ever going to see you sitting here like this again. And I know we're not completely out of the woods. There's still more recovery to go on, but you look.
Larry, you really look good. I told you
it's
that
shocking.
when I saw you. We feared that you were going to be, really in a bad way, and really, I mean, you look great.
I appreciate
considering what you've been through.
I appreciate that. The Lord is so faithful, and that wouldn't, by the way, be I wouldn't change had I died. I mean, the Lord is very faithful and has a purpose in these things, and yes, your perspective on that reflects the experience of others. My boys were out of town, and my wife, when I was in ER, I had kept saying, "Could you call my wife? Could you call my wife?" And of course they did, but they didn't really tell her anything, and she was under the impression I'd had a broken bone or two, and that I had been sideswiped or something by a car. In other words, hey, he's broken a wrist, or something, he's going to be home. And the boys tell me, they say, the news got darker and darker and darker. And then she saw you and then relayed to us, your dad's in a pretty bad way. And one of my sons was at his girlfriend's place in Knoxville, and the other son was at his girlfriend's place in Atlanta, and the other one here locally, and of course my daughter Sasha. But they started coming back, and they said, we weren't sure that we were going to be back in time to see you. And so, I'm glad to be here. It's a thrill for me, and I mean this, guys. It's great for me to be among friends, and to have a new lease on life, as it were, and to know, as John 9 says, Jesus and the disciples are walking along, and there's a man who's been born blind, and they ask him, who sinned, him or his parents? And Jesus said, neither, but that the power of God, the work of God, might be displayed in him. And I can relate to that man, because I feel that it's the Lord's purpose in the case of my accident that his power might be displayed in me. Just in what you've just said, that I'm here, that I am here is listen, I take nothing away from the skill of the physicians, the medical professionals who looked after me. But I will say that skill was slightly enhanced by the power of God.
We'll come back. Larry Taunton, we'll delve into, first of all, there may be some people that we're looking for today, especially one individual that was Larry's found out was there on the scene that he didn't even know about till just recently. And if you're that individual, we may be able to put you on.
We want to talk to you.
We want to talk to you, and we'll talk about the eyewitness that saw what happened, and then we'll dig deeper into what's going on. We'll be right back. Stay close.
Rick and Bubba.
So Larry now was involved in this horrific crash involving his bicycle and a vehicle. He was unconscious, remembered none of it until he came to or became conscious in the ambulance, gasping for breath and talking to the paramedics, who did a superb job. But he then got an email, was it? I
got a letter.
A letter from a woman who said, I saw the whole thing.
That's right. I have no memory, as you've just stated, of the accident itself.
Praise the Lord for that.
The police, yes, truly. And the police report is very sketchy on the details. And this woman wrote me a letter. She wasn't listed as a witness on the police report, and it was a beautiful letter. And she said she saw it. She was sure I was dead. And then her mother sent her an article about me that said that I was alive. And she said she couldn't believe it. And she sent me this letter. She met us down there, and she described the accident. And she said, I was just sitting there at the gas station. Something about you caught my eye. I watched you coming down the hill. And she said, and I saw the car pull right into your path. And she said, I'm sitting in my car some distance away, and I hear the crack. and your bicycle explode against the side of that vehicle. And she said, you went straight vertical. And I said, you're kidding me. She said, no, you hit the windshield and ricocheted and went 25 or 30 feet in the air like a rag doll and hit the ground with a crack, and you weren't moving. And she said, I thought you were probably dead. And she said, I and other people rushed out to the street where you were, and someone who said he was a physician started doing CPR. And I said, the police report doesn't mention that. She said, well, it's because they weren't there. But he begins doing CPR and says, you're not responding. And he stops doing CPR, and a few minutes later, you come to. And she says, and you're writhing and moaning in pain, and there's blood all over the street and so forth. And she said, I left when emergency personnel arrived. I left thinking that man's going to die. And that filled in a gap in my memory of what happened. But the Lord is so faithful in these things, and the reality is there are people listening in this audience, the huge Rick and Bubba fan base that's listening all over the world. There are people in the sound of our voices this morning who have known genuine suffering in this room, who have known genuine suffering. And it raises interesting questions about the sovereignty of God and about his purposes in these things. And for me, Rick, and you and I have talked about this just a little bit, but listen, I've broken bones before, and I've known real pain, but not pain that went on for weeks and months, that was overwhelming, and the medications you get, knocking the pain level down from a 9 to a 7, and where you just feel overwhelmed by it. And through the process of all this, the pain you discover is not just simply a physical challenge, but when you really know pain, you discover it's an emotional, it's a mental, and it is a spiritual challenge. And forgive me for saying so, but I'll say as C.S. Lewis did in Mere Christianity when he says, I'm going to talk about the devil. I'm going to talk about the devil too. I believe that Satan comes to us in our weakness. And because that's when we're most vulnerable. And I will tell you that for me, at various times in this process where you bottom out, Psalm 30, David wrote that psalm when he was sick and was sure he was going to die. And he speaks of going into the pit. And I will tell you, I felt that I was in the pit. And then he speaks of God redeeming him from the pit. And for me, when you're in that place, it feels like Satan comes along and sits beside you and puts his arm around you and speaks to you in soft, gentle tones and says, so do you still think your God is a good God? And using my own theology against me, because I believe in the sovereignty of God. So Larry, I believe in a sovereign God too. So that means he's responsible for this. He either caused this accident or he allowed it. So what do you make of him now? And I have to tell you that the extraordinary journey, and it just keeps going for me, where I've learned so much. At one point, after I got out of the hospital, I was just telling Helmsy here, I spent only in the last week have I been in a bed. I've been sleeping for 2 months in a recliner because I couldn't lay down. The pain was just that great. And Lori and I felt so bad because Lori's sleeping on the couch next to me. She will not go upstairs. So I thought, I need to get into bed so my wife can get a good night's sleep. So we go upstairs, and she helps me sit on the edge of the bed, and she says, sit right here, and I'm going to go and brush my teeth. When I come back, I'm going to help lay you down. I mean, I was at a stage where I couldn't brush my own teeth. I couldn't wash my own hair. Nothing. And in the interval, it's in that moment that I really felt my faith challenged. What do I think of God now? Where is he in all this? And Lori comes out, and my head is down, and she gets down at an angle where she can look up into my face, and she can see that my eyes are pooling with tears because the pain was just unrelenting. And she knew something has happened between the moments I sat him on the edge of the bed and now. And I said, Lori, is this just my life going forward? And yet I feel that God is with me in this, and He is displaying His love to me in a way that I've never experienced it before. I felt moments ago like He'd been silent. Say something. Help me here. Yeah. And He has spoken from the whirlwind, as it were, and is telling me, Larry, there are things that I could never teach you through your prosperity in your strength, but only through weakness and pain, as the Apostle Paul speaks of his own pain, the famed thorn in the flesh. That was the next question the guy was going to ask you. Okay, so we settled the mark. What was the thorn in the flesh? In any case, that has been true for me. And I realize that the Lord allows us to suffer for 3 general reasons. You've hit on a couple already. One is to discipline us. We're told that God took Saul's life for his disobedience. Another is to grow us spiritually, and that's the case of the Apostle Paul and his thorn in the flesh. He says, "I'd be arrogant, otherwise," and that the purpose of this is that I might rely on Him, that His grace, I would see it as sufficient for me. And the third reason, which you hit on a moment ago, Rick, is that He might expand our ministry platform, not so that we might be self-aggrandized, but
effectiveness,
for the purpose of effectiveness. And that's John chapter 9. Why is this man been born blind? That the power of God might be displayed in him. And I have come to recognize that I'm finite, God is infinite. Isaiah 55, speaks of His thoughts as higher than our thoughts, His ways higher than our ways. And I can get into trouble when I try to, through my finite mind, understand the infinite's purposes.
So if you were on the scene and you gave Larry Taunton CPR, he sure would like to meet you.
Larry, what was the date? Give us the date.
October 10th.
October
10th at Highland Avenue and Arlington Avenue, where they intersect, right in front of Temple Bethel in Birmingham,
The
Alabama.
bicycle guy that got hit by a car that was laying there not responding.
That's right.
So if you were that person, contact me or Bubba or any of us, and we'll get you in touch with Larry.
Or maybe if that person's not listening, somebody in his family is and says, "Hey, he came in and told me today he saw a bicycle wreck."
Yeah, that would be
October 10th.
We've talked a good bit about the points, the accident itself, and then Larry called me and even asked, "Do you think I should share this other part, because I know we're about to get down a little bit of a dicey road here."
Yeah.
And you are a person that really, for the most part, is somewhat skeptical.
Very.
Okay, I'll pick it. You are very skeptical.
Because we'd had discussions about some of our other guests that had been on.
Of the near-death experience people, that they actually saw heaven or saw this or saw that.
Got a glimpse.
Or a glimpse. And you said something took place with you, especially now that you know the whole story, that you want to at least attempt, because it is pretty deep, to attempt to discuss.
Yeah,
you have the floor, Mr. Taunton.
There we go. Thank you, sir.
Mm-hmm.
Listen, this experience is something that I've been processing, obviously, since it happened on October 10th of this year. And I have as we've discussed, no recollection of the actual impact of my body flying into the air and hitting the ground, or somebody doing CPR on me. I came down the hill, just as I've said, and then I looked to my right, and the next thing I know, I'm in an ambulance. But what I had an overwhelming sense of from the moment I was in that ambulance on, and Rick, it should be pointed out, the medications I've been given, they said would affect memory a lot. So Rick and Sherry come to see me in the hospital. I vaguely remember you being there. I vaguely remember you coming on other people. My wife will nudge me and say, "Hey, you should say something to them. They came to see you." And I'm like, I don't remember that at all. And yet,
Larry, do you remember me coming by?
Bubba, I think I remember you coming by.
It was right after Rick. I don't know if you remember that.
I do remember that.
Yes,
Bubba.
I actually rode together.
We had a lengthy conversation about
I was
tennis.
with Danny.
A lengthy conversation about tennis. That was him. No, I'm afraid that's when you were taken up into the third heaven. But anyway, now go ahead.
Well, in any case, through all of this, there's been so many details that that is to say, people who came to visit me that I don't remember, and yet I remember all of this, and this has stayed with me, and that is this. As I told my wife just a week or so ago, I said, Lori, there's a detail here that I haven't mentioned, and it's this. I have had this overwhelming sense from the moment that the impact occurred that I was either in the presence of God or in that which reflected His glory. And I want to be clear, I make no claims that I was in heaven. I make no claims with certainty that I was truly in the presence of God. Might have been one of His angels. Perhaps it's just because I had a severe blow on my head and the medications backdated my memory. But as you've said, I'm in the business of being fairly skeptical of a lot of claims. I'm not a charismatic. I'm a slow convert to these types of stories. And the most interesting, or one of the interesting details of this, is that I couldn't begin to describe to you anything beyond really a feeling. There was no white light in corridor that I was walking towards, or a great throne, or streets of gold. There's nothing like that. And I'm a little encouraged by what the Apostle Paul says of what you just quoted, where he says that he was caught up in paradise, whether in body or out, I do not know.
Right.
And he heard things that cannot be told, which man may not utter. My experience reflects the Apostle Paul's. Now, whether I was in heaven or not, I don't know. But I had this overwhelming sense of God's sovereignty and purpose. I had barely a sense of myself. I had no sense that an accident had occurred. It was just this sense that I was as kind of in a holding pattern. And before my brain could catch up to any of it, I have this overwhelming sense of pain, and I'm gasping for air. But what has stayed with me through the entire experience, I never had any fear of dying. I've said that before, but none of us really know until the threat is really imminent. I never had any. The overwhelming feelings that I had were obviously my pain and how my family and friends were processing me. You know, I have 3 different women who came to see me passed out, because I just looked that rough.
The way you look right now, y'all don't understand.
Yeah, I mean
it's
Rick had told us, and Larry, we're just amazed how good you look today.
Well, Bubba, you sound like you got a man crush on me over there.
Yeah. Well, no, it's just, I mean, I guess I had, because Rick had told us what was going on.
Well, this side of his face was completely
I mean,
collapsed.
I guess our expectations was not very high today.
But
I guess, is that a good way to say it?
No, I get it.
We were kind of concerned. Well, when you were trying to describe this to me,
I thought you might have Darth Vader mask on or something. I didn't know what you're going to wear.
Which was indescribable.
That's right.
It was interesting to have the phone conversation with you, which was the before today.
Yep.
What I realized was you couldn't describe it.
I could not.
That you couldn't do words, which made me think of what you just read from Paul about the third heaven.
Yep.
And then also when Jesus said, when they were asking him about where he was going, and he basically tells the disciples, I'm paraphrasing, I would have to use words you wouldn't understand.
Well, and it is
that's there. Any parallel I would try to use would cheapen it. And my wife gave me this advice, and it's great advice. She said, "I think it's true, and I think you should tell it." Lori's a skeptic as I am, but she said this: "Don't try to analogize it; it cheapens it because there's nothing in an earthly parallel that it's like you're."
Which is hard for somebody like you to not expand on it.
And that's right.
But she's saying don't.
She said don't.
It is what it is.
Leave
You
it as
can't
it
compare
is.
it to food in any way.
You
Is that what
cannot.
you're saying?
You cannot. And to me also an aspect of this that is so significant. I say this to people who are, as we've said, there are people who have really suffered.
Yeah.
And who wonder what God's purposes are in this. Pain will drive you to God. It'll drive you from Him. The choice is yours.
It goes either way.
But my overwhelming sense was that of God's purpose and his sovereignty. And while I can't fully understand, I'm still unpacking the Lord's purposes in this, that he does have a purpose in it and he is in control. And so from that moment that I revive, as it were, and the pain being all that it was, I had absolute confidence. No matter what happens here, I serve a God who was not surprised by what happened.
It's not chaos.
He knew that it was coming, and he controls all of it.
Yeah, it's interesting. We were talking about Sherry's book, and you read it before this ever happened to you. It's called A Journey to Understand, and the fact is, God is not silent on these things, and you're 100% right when you get to the point where you realize he's in control, and he has not been silent on all this. And I think what you were experiencing, I have no way to know, if nothing else, who knows what it was, but you can say the things you say describe you understood what it felt like to be at total peace.
Yeah.
When what was really going on in the world in your life at the time was total chaos.